You're looking at a wooden pergola in a backyard. No power lines running to it, no meter spinning, and yet the house behind it has lights on, a refrigerator humming, and heat in the winter. Look closer. That structure isn't decoration, it's the power plant. The whole thing runs the house, and the utility company sends no bill, because there's nothing to bill. This is not a new invention, this is old Amish thinking wrapped around a backyard structure most people walk right past. I'm going to show you a document from 1881, filed by a man named Edward Morse, that quietly proves the finale of this video is real. And if you already own your home, don't tune out. Every piece of this works on a house that's already standing. I spent 30 years paying an electric bill I thought was just part of being alive. You send the check, the lights stay on, you never ask why. Then, a few winters ago, I drove out to Holmes County, Ohio to buy a set of hand-built kitchen cabinets, and I ended up staying for supper with the family that made them. The sun went down, the kitchen stayed warm and bright, and I stood there in the doorway like a fool, looking for the vent, looking for the thermostat, looking for the little glowing box on the wall that every house I'd ever lived in had. There wasn't one. There was no furnace kicking on, there was no hum of a heat pump outside, and this family was paying nothing, not a reduced bill, nothing. $0 to any power company any month of the year. Now, I was raised to be polite, but I was also raised to be skeptical, and everything in me said this had to be some kind of trick. Maybe they had a generator hidden somewhere, maybe they were secretly tapped into a neighbor's line, so I asked, and the grandfather, a man in his 70s with hands like tree bark, walked me outside into the dark and pointed at a low wooden structure in the yard, something I'd have called a pergola or a trellis if you'd shown me a picture. And he said, that's where the power comes from. That and the wall of the house you were just standing next to. And I want to be honest with you about my first reaction, because it's probably your reaction right now. I thought, there's no way that little structure runs a house. I stood out there in the cold for a long time after that, and I'll tell you what really got under my skin. It wasn't just that they'd done it, it was how calm they were about it. There was no pride in his voice, no sense that they'd pulled off something clever. To him, it was as ordinary as owning a wheelbarrow. And that's when it hit me that I was the strange one. I was the man who'd handed a stranger money every single month for 40 years for something this family treated as plain common sense. I drove home the next morning with those cabinets in the back of my truck, and I couldn't stop doing the arithmetic in my head. 40 years, 12 months a year. The number I came up with was so large I had to say it out loud in the cab of the truck to believe it, and I want you to do the same math on your own life before this video is over. But here's the thing about the Amish that the rest of us get completely wrong. We think they reject technology. They don't. What they reject is dependency. They reject being hooked into a system they can't control, a system that can raise its price whenever it wants, fail whenever it wants, and reach right into your home through a wire you didn't string yourself. So, when the modern world figured out how to pull electricity straight out of sunlight, a lot of Amish communities didn't say no. They said yes, but on our terms, on our land, with our own hands, not connected to your grid. And that single decision, made quietly in farmhouses across Pennsylvania and Ohio, is the reason a wooden structure in the backyard can do what I'm about to describe. Let me give you the hard numbers, because I know you didn't click on this to hear a nice story. A pergola is nothing more than a frame, posts in the ground, beams across the top. Traditionally, you'd grow grapes on it or stretch a canvas for shade, but that flat top, angled toward the southern sky, is almost the perfect surface to catch the sun. Cover that frame with solar panels instead of grapevines, and something remarkable happens. A pergola roof around 12 feet by 12 feet holds enough panels to make a 5 kilowatt system. In a decent climate, that setup produces roughly 21 kilowatt hours of electricity in a single day. Over a full year, that's somewhere near 7,700 kilowatt hours. Now here's the number that made me sit down. The average American home uses right around that same figure every year. The math isn't magic. The structure in the backyard can genuinely cover the bulk of what a normal household burns through, and a well-placed backyard array can offset well over 65% of a typical home's electricity all by itself. Let me put that in terms you can feel. Why a pergola and not just bolting panels to your roof like the salesman push? Because your roof faces whatever direction the builder happened to point it 50 years ago. Half the roofs in America face east and west, which is the wrong way to catch the midday sun. Your roof might be shaded by the very trees that keep your house cool. Your roof might be old, and the last thing you want is to tear off panels in 10 years to replace shingles underneath them. A pergola answers every one of those problems at once. You stand at exactly where the sun is strongest. You tilt it to the perfect angle for your latitude. You put it where no tree blocks it. And you build it at eye level, in your own yard, where you can reach every bolt and every panel with a stepladder instead of a death-defying climb. The Amish didn't invent the pergola to be clever. They built low and reachable because a thing you can maintain yourself is a thing you never have to pay a company to touch. And the cost of it will surprise you in the other direction. People assume a system like this runs $40,000 or $50,000 because that's what the big installers quote for a whole roof job with their markup and their financing and their salesman's commission baked in. But complete off-grid kits, the panels, the batteries, and the inverter that ties it all together have quietly dropped to a few $1,000s for a serious setup. I've watched 10 kilowatt kits with lithium batteries included change hands for around $3,500. When you build the frame yourself and skip the installer entirely, the way an Amish family would, the number stops looking like a luxury and starts looking like a few years of the bill you're already paying anyway. That is the part they'd rather you never sit down and calculate. But a solar panel by itself is only half the story, and this is where most people building these systems make the mistake that keeps them chained to the utility anyway. A panel makes power when the sun shines. The sun goes down every single night. So if all you have is panels, you're still calling the power company the moment it gets dark, and you're still on the hook, still paying, still dependent. The Amish family solved this the same way they've solved food storage for 200 years. They store what they make when they have extra, so they have it when they don't. For food, that's a root cellar. For power, that's a bank of batteries sitting in a shed or a basement, quietly filling up all day and feeding the house all night. A modest setup, 1 or 2 panels with battery storage, is enough to run lights, a water pump, and a refrigerator on an Amish farm indefinitely, with no monthly bill and no wire running to the road. And notice the discipline hidden inside that, because it's the whole reason the Amish succeed where so many modern folks give up. They size their life to their system first, before they ever size the system to their life. They run the freezer and the pump and the lights during the day when the sun is pouring in for free, and they lean lightly on the batteries at night. They don't fight the sun's rhythm, they live inside it. That one habit, using power when you're making it and coasting when you're not, stretches a modest battery bank further than a mountain of expensive storage ever could for a household that never bothers to change how it lives. It costs nothing to learn, and it's the single thing no salesman will ever teach you, because there's no product to sell in simply being sensible. Therefore, the pergola is not really the whole secret. The pergola is the visible half. The invisible half is the storage and the discipline to size it right, and that's exactly the part the industry doesn't want the average homeowner to understand, because the moment you understand storage, you stop needing them at night. And here's where the story stops being charming and starts making me angry, because I want you to notice something. Nobody taught us this. I'm nearly 60 years old. I owned 3 different houses, and not one time did a builder, an electrician, or a single soul from the power company ever tell me that the flat structure I could put in my own backyard might carry the load of my entire home. Why do you think that is? Someone benefited from my ignorance, and it wasn't me, and it wasn't you. Think about the machine you've been feeding your whole life. Every house built in this country for the last 70 years was designed around one silent assumption, that a wire would always run from the road to your wall, and that money would always flow back the other way. The whole system is built so the meter never stops. When electricity first spread across rural America in the 1930s and 40s, it was sold as liberation, and for a lot of folks it was. But something got lost in that same moment. The knowledge of how to warm your home, cool your food, and light your rooms without paying anyone a dime, the knowledge our great-grandparents took for granted, got labeled old-fashioned and quietly pushed into the barn to die. The Amish just never let it die. They kept both. They kept the old wisdom, and they added the new panel on top of it. So the pergola makes the power. But the deeper Amish trick, the one that cuts your needs in half before you generate a single watt, has nothing to do with electricity at all. And that's the part I need you to understand next, because it's the reason their houses stay comfortable on almost no energy in the first place. Here's the paradox that stopped me cold. That warm kitchen in Ohio, the one with no furnace and no thermostat, was warmest on the coldest, sunniest days of winter. That makes no sense to a modern mind. Cold day, warm house, no furnace running, how? The answer is a wall. Specifically, the south-facing wall of the house, built thick and heavy and treated as a battery for heat instead of just a barrier against it. This is the oldest solar technology on Earth, and it has a name most homeowners have never heard. In the Sunbelt of France, in a little town called Odeo, an engineer named Jacques Michel and a scientist named Félix Trombe built a house in 1967 that heated itself through the winter using nothing but a thick dark wall behind a pane of glass. The world named it after Trombe. But the idea did not start in 1967. And here's the detail that should raise the hair on your neck. That principle, the heavy sun-facing wall, is not French, and it is not modern. It is thousands of years old. The Greeks built entire cities so that every home faced south to catch the low winter sun. Socrates himself described the ideal house as one that was warm in winter and cool in summer purely by the way it was oriented to the sky. The Romans put glass over their south walls to trap the heat. This is the single oldest, most tested, most proven idea in the history of human shelter, and somewhere in the last 70 years, we simply stopped building it. We traded 3,000 years of accumulated wisdom for a thermostat on the wall and a bill in the mailbox. The Amish were among the very few who refused to make that trade, and now their houses look like magic to people like me who forgot what our ancestors knew cold. Here is how the wall actually works, and why it feels like cheating once you see it. You take the south wall of a house, the wall that faces the winter sun. You make it out of something heavy and dense, brick, stone, concrete, or in the old days, packed earth. You paint the outside of it dark. Then you hang a sheet of glass a few inches in front of it, leaving a thin air gap. Sunlight passes through the glass, hits that dark, heavy wall, and turns to heat. The glass traps that heat in the gap, the same way a closed car gets blazing hot in a parking lot. All day long, that massive wall soaks up warmth like a stone in a fire. Then, when the sun goes down and the temperature drops, the wall slowly releases everything it stored, radiating gentle heat into the house for hours after dark. No fan, no fuel, no moving parts. Just a wall, some glass, and the sun doing the work your furnace charges you for. And the numbers on this are not small. Building scientists and the university extension services that study passive solar heating are clear that a properly placed south wall and south-facing glass can meaningfully offset the heating a house needs, cutting into the single biggest energy cost most families have, because heating and cooling is where the money burns. This is not a gadget. There is nothing to break. A Trombe wall built right just sits there for 100 years, quietly refusing to send you a bill. The Amish understood the principle long before it had a French name, which is why their homes are built long on the east-west axis, with the big windows and the heavy walls facing the winter sun and the small windows facing the cold north. But I can already hear the objection forming in your head because I said the same thing out loud in that kitchen. That's fine for them, I thought. They built their house that way from the ground up. My house is already built. I can't tear my south wall off and start over. And if that's what you're thinking right now, I need you to stay with me, because you're about to find out you were told a lie by leaving it there. Now, if you already own a house, and you're thinking this only applies to people building from scratch, stay with me, because this next part is specifically for you. I know exactly who you are, because I was you. You've got a house that went up sometime before 1980, with walls the builder never gave a second thought to, facing whatever direction the road happened to run. You figure a system like this is for the young couple building fresh out in the country, not for a man with a mortgage that's mostly paid off and a house he's not about to tear apart. I understand that completely. But the truth is the opposite of what you'd expect. And it's the best news in this whole video. An older home is actually the easier one to fix, because the changes bolt on from the outside, and the sunniest wall you own is very likely already sitting there doing absolutely nothing. You do not need to rebuild your wall. You do not need a contractor, and you do not need anyone's permission to warm your own home with your own sunlight. Here is what the Amish and the old-timers actually did on houses that already existed, and it is so simple it almost made me angry that nobody had told me. You take the south-facing wall you already have. On the outside of it, in the spot that gets the most winter sun, you mount a shallow box. The back of that box, you paint flat black. The front of it you cover with a clear panel, glass, or a sheet of polycarbonate. Then you cut 2 small openings through the wall into the room behind it, one down low and one up high. Watch what happens. The sun heats the black surface inside that box until the air in there is scorching. Hot air rises, so it flows out the top, opening into your room. As that hot air leaves the box, it pulls cooler room air in through the bottom opening to replace it. And now you have a loop. A silent, self-driving current of warm air circling into your house all day, with no fan, no motor, and no electricity at all. On a sunny winter day, a box like this can push air in the range of 100 degrees into a cold room off a structure you built over a single weekend with lumber, black paint, and a clear sheet. It costs a fraction of what one winter's heating bill costs, and it never asks for another cent as long as the sun keeps rising. Let me be even more specific because I don't want you left guessing. The old-timers used to build the guts of these boxes out of whatever caught heat best. Some packed the inside with soda cans painted black, stacked in columns so the air had to snake through them and soak up every degree. Some used a sheet of black window screen or a piece of corrugated metal painted flat black because a rough dark surface grabs far more heat than a smooth one. The frame is just 2x4s. The glazing is a sheet of clear polycarbonate from the hardware store, the kind that won't shatter and won't yellow for years. You want it facing as close to true south as you can manage, tilted up toward that low winter sun. The 2 holes through your wall want to be modest, and here's the one rule that matters most. Put a simple flap over the lower vent, a light hinged piece that lets warm air out but won't let it reverse at night, so the cold doesn't crawl back in after dark and steal what you gained. That single flap is the difference between a heater that works and a hole in your wall. The whole thing can be built for the price of a nice dinner out, and it will quietly cut the corner off your heating bill every sunny day for the next 20 years. And understand what you've just done, because it's bigger than a warm room. You have taken a piece of your home's comfort back out of somebody else's hands and put it into your own. That is the whole game, not doing it all at once, doing it one box, one wall, one panel at a time, until the day comes when the meter could stop spinning and you'd barely notice. And this is the exact moment I want to tell you something, because you've just been handed one real working technique, and there are many more where that came from. Everything I'm walking you through, the sizing of the storage, the black box solar heater, the way the Amish lay a house out to cut cooling costs in half in July, I pulled together into a single collection called the Complete Field Vault. 3 volumes of these suppressed home formulas for heating, cooling, food storage, pest control, and going off-grid, so you're not left with just the one taste you got today. There's a special limited time offer on it right now. It's linked down in the description, and you can scan the QR code on your screen to see it. This is the rest of the buried archive, the part they hoped you'd never go looking for, and I'd rather you have it than lose it again. Now, let me show you the other half of the year, because summer is where the real suppression happened. Because here's the tension nobody resolves. Everything I've told you so far is about heat, about staying warm when it's cold. But you and I both know the bigger, uglier bill comes in the summer, when the air conditioner runs day and night and the meter spins like a slot machine. So, how did these families keep food from spoiling and rooms from baking in July in Pennsylvania and Ohio in houses with no air conditioning at all? Because that's the part that truly separates people who are dependent from people who are free. The answer is under your feet, and it's the same answer that fed this continent for 300 years before refrigeration existed. And here's a piece of history most people never learned in school. Before the electric refrigerator arrived in the 1920s and 30s, nearly every rural home in America had a root cellar, and the United States Department of Agriculture actually printed bulletins instructing farmers on exactly how to build and manage them. The government of the day considered it basic knowledge, as ordinary as knowing how to plant corn. Then the refrigerator was sold into every kitchen, the power lines followed it out into the countryside, and within 2 generations that USDA knowledge was allowed to gather dust while families started paying, month after month, to keep a box cold in their kitchen that the earth would have kept cold for free. Go down, just a few feet below the surface of the ground, the earth stops caring what season it is. Above ground, it can be 10 degrees in January or 95 in July, but down below the frost line, the soil holds a steady temperature all year long, somewhere between about 45 and 55 degrees, day and night, summer and winter, decade after decade. That is colder than most people keep their refrigerators, and it is completely free. The Amish, and every farming family before the modern age, built root cellars into that cool band of earth, and stored a full year of vegetables, apples, eggs, cheese, and cured meat down there with no electricity whatsoever. And you don't need a hillside farm to reach it. If your house has a basement, the coldest corner of it is already sitting in that cool band of earth, doing nothing. The old-timers would partition off that corner, insulate the door between it and the heated part of the house, and add 1 vent low and 1 vent high to the outside. And just like that, they had a working cold room that held its temperature through the hottest week of the year. Some dug a cellar into a north-facing bank where the sun never reaches. Some sank an old chest freezer that had quit working straight into the ground and used it as a sealed, animal-proof cold box. The method bends to whatever land you've got. What never changes is the earth itself, holding that steady cool the same way it did for your great-grandparents, patient and free, and completely beyond the reach of any company's price hike. But the genius of it goes further than storing food, and this is where it ties straight back to the pergola and the house. That same steady, cool underground temperature can be used to cool the house itself. Run a simple loop of pipe down into that cool earth, move the air or water from your house through it, and the ground pulls the heat right out of it before sending it back up. No compressor, no chemical refrigerant, no roaring unit outside your window. Cool air sinks, warm air rises, and with nothing more than 2 vents and the natural pull of temperature, a properly built cellar or an earth tube creates its own gentle current, circulating cool air upward into the living space while the warm air escapes out the top. The earth becomes your air conditioner, and it never sends a bill, never breaks down in a heat wave, and never gets shut off because the grid went down. Therefore, put the whole picture together and you can see what that family in Ohio actually had. The pergola in the backyard caught the sun and made the electricity. The battery bank stored it for the night. The heavy south wall soaked up winter warmth and gave it back after dark. And the cool earth below the house held their food and tempered their summer air. 4 simple systems, all of them old, none of them requiring a single wire from the road. And every one of those 4 things can be added to a house that is already standing. That's not a coincidence, and it's not luck. It's a way of thinking that was deliberately allowed to fade because a family that makes its own power, stores its own food, and heats and cools itself with the sun and the soil is a family that has nothing left to buy from anyone. Now, who benefited from you never learning this? Follow it back, because it starts gentle and it gets darker the further you go. At first, it's simply that somebody profited from your ignorance, which is true of a lot of things and easy to shrug off. But go one step further. Who wrote the rules that decided what a normal house looks like? Who sat on the committees that set the building standards, that decided a home needed a furnace and a central air unit, but never once required it to face the sun, never once required a wall that could hold heat, never once required a cellar that could hold cool? The people who profited from selling you fuel and selling you power had a seat at that table. The industries whose entire existence depended on your monthly payment helped shape the standards that made your monthly payment feel inevitable. That is not a wild conspiracy. That is just how influence works. Quietly, in committee rooms, one reasonable sounding decision at a time, until an entire nation forgets it ever had another choice. In the middle of the 20th century, as electricity and natural gas spread into every home, entire industries were built on one beautiful, permanent assumption that your comfort would always depend on their product. And the standards, the codes, the very way houses came to be designed and financed, all of it lined up behind that assumption. It became normal to build a house with no thought to which way it faced the sun, because the furnace would handle it. Normal to build with thin walls that hold no heat, because the utility would handle it. Normal to have no cellar at all, because the refrigerator plugged into their wire would handle it. Every one of those normal choices quietly deleted a piece of knowledge your great-grandparents would have considered basic survival. The Amish were called backward for keeping it. Turns out they were just early. And that brings me to the thing I promised you at the very beginning. The piece of buried research that proves this whole idea is not some new fad, but a suppressed American original. Because you might assume that solar heating is a modern, hippie, 1970s idea. It isn't. I told you to remember a name, Edward Morse, and a year, 1881. Edward Sylvester Morse was no crank and no dreamer. He was one of the most respected scientists in the country in his day, a professor, a man whose name carried weight in the halls of American science. And in the year 1881, he was granted a United States patent for something he described as a method and means of warming and ventilating apartments by the sun's rays. Sit with that title for a moment. Warming and ventilating your home by the sun's rays, patented in America in 1881, nearly a century and a half ago. What Morse described in that patent was almost exactly the black box I told you to build on your south wall, a glazed box mounted on the sunny side of a building with a dark absorbing surface inside and two sets of vents, one to draw in cool air and one to deliver warm air into the room. He had it completely worked out before your grandparents were born. He proved it, documented it, and filed it with the United States government, where the record still sits today, plain as day, for anyone who bothers to look. So here is the whole hero's journey in one breath. The knowledge existed, proven and patented by an American scientist in 1881. Then, as the wires and the gas lines spread, it was smothered, called obsolete, and left out of every building manual and every subdivision that went up after the war. But it was never actually lost, because a few communities refused to let go of it, communities that valued their independence more than they valued convenience, and they carried it forward in their barns and their farmhouses through every decade that told them they were foolish. And now, tonight, sitting wherever you're sitting, it's been handed back to you. The same design a man patented in 1881, the same principle the Amish still build into their homes, and you can build the first working piece of it this weekend with a sheet of glass, a can of black paint, and a south-facing wall you already own. That's the whole secret. Not a product, not a subscription. A structure in the backyard that makes your power, a wall that catches your heat, a cellar that holds your cool, and a 140-year-old patent that says all of it was yours to begin with. What they took from you was never the technology. What they took was the knowledge that you didn't need them at all. And notice how it all fits together, one piece feeding the next. The solar box warms the very rooms the pergola lights. The cool earth that stores your harvest tempers the same air the sun heats in winter. It is a single, quiet system that our great-grandparents ran without ever calling it anything special, because to them, it wasn't special. It was just how you kept a family safe and warm and fed on your own ground, answering to nobody. That is what was taken, and that is exactly what you can start taking back this weekend. If you're the kind of person who suspects that real, practical knowledge has been quietly pushed aside to protect somebody else's profit, then you already understand exactly what you just watched, and you already know what to do with it. So let me ask you something specific, and I genuinely want your answer. Which piece are you going to build first? The black solar box from Edward Morse's 1881 patent on your south wall, or the pergola that carries your power? Tell me in the comments right now in one sentence which one you're starting with, because I read them and I want to know where you're beginning. Don't just think it, type it. This audience is quiet, and the quiet ones are usually the ones who actually go out and do the work. And if this stirred something in you, subscribe, but not to support me. Subscribe, because there's a growing group of us who are done being dependent, who are digging up the knowledge that was buried on purpose and putting it back to work on our own land with our own hands. That's what this is. Next time, I'm going to show you the Amish ice house method, the way they kept ice frozen solid all the way through August with no electricity and no freezer. Using one material, almost every one of you already has piled up somewhere on your property. You won't believe what it is until I show you. Stay with me, and I'll see you there.